This is an example of what your knitting will look like if you cast on in the rib cable method or the alternate cable method and then knit in a 1x1 rib for a few rows. You can see that the ribbing goes all the way down to the cast on edge, which is really nice. Rather than having a firm stop, you have the rib all the way down. For this method, you're going to need both knitting needles and a skein of yarn. First, we're going to start by making a slip knot. So you can set aside your knitting needles, wrap your yarn around your finger twice, pull the back loop over the front loop, and the new back loop over and off your finger. Tighten it up. There's your slip knot. Place it on your knitting needle and tighten it. At this point, you have one stitch cast on. We need to start the second stitch. We're going to do this by knitting into the stitch. Take your right hand needle and place it into the stitch from the bottom to the top. Wrap your working yarn around your right hand needle. And now take your right hand needle and put it back into the stitch from the top to the bottom. Now take your left hand needle and put it into the stitch from the bottom to the top. That's your second cast on stitch. For the next stitch, we're going to do a purl stitch so that we can be starting our ribbing pattern. To do the purl stitch, we're going to move our right hand needle to the back of our work and put it in between these stitches from the back to the front. Then wrap your working yarn around it and pull it back in between these stitches from the front to the back. Now, take your left hand needle and go into the stitch from the bottom to the top. You can now take out your right hand needle. You can give it a little bit of a tightening, but not too much, otherwise it will be really hard to get your right hand needle through those stitches. So that was our purl stitch. Now we're going to do a knit stitch. To do the knit stitch in this method, put your needle in between these two stitches from the front to the back, like this. Now, just as before, wrap your working yarn around your right hand needle, and this time, pull your right hand needle from the back to the front. Now put your left hand needle down and up through the stitch and remove your right hand needle. Tighten a little tiny bit. And now it's time for another purl stitch. We're alternating between purls and knits while casting on. So since we just did a knit, we're going to do a purl. Remember that means going from the back to the front, wrapping our working yarn around, and then going from the front to the back. And then taking our left hand needle and going from the bottom to the top. You can do a slight amount of tightening and then continue with your knit stitch from the front to the back, wrapping around, going from the back to the front, and taking your left hand needle and going from the bottom to the top. You can do a small amount of tightening if you want. And now at this point I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 stitches cast on. If all I needed was 6 stitches, I could start knitting right now. Because our last stitch was a knit stitch, if I were to start knitting, I would go in and I would knit my first stitch and purl the next stitch and then continue in that pattern. Knitting, and purling. And knitting, and purling. And if you keep this up, your work will start to look something like this.